So, welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. With me today, I have Ron Davis, who is CEO and co-founder of Tenacity. Hi, Ron.
Hi, Adrian. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So, Ron, for the benefit of our listeners and readers, can you tell us a little bit more about you and a bit about the work that you do?
Sure. So I'm from the Pacific Northwest of the United States. Grew up in Oregon. Ended up with an early career in sales, and then found my way to Harvard Law School, which was intellectually stimulating, but ultimately ended up taking some extra classes at MIT while I was there, and found my passion in entrepreneurship, and particularly in the research that's guiding what we're doing now. So I ended up spinning a company out of MIT, still graduated from the law school, but I've had my head down and been working on this now for a few years.
Perfect. Now, I know that Tenacity it's a software. You're playing around with the software. It's coming out of research and things, but it's focused on employee retention in the contact center. Now, before we get into the nuts and bolts of what you guys are doing, employee retention in the contact center is kind of a big area. So, can you give us an estimate of the size and the scale of the problem that we're talking about in terms of what it costs firms in terms of money, sick days, turnover costs, all that sort of stuff?
Sure. So, in the end, we're managing morale, right? And morale touches a lot of things. It touches productivity, it touches absenteeism, but it does seem to be that the biggest area that it touches is retention, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
At a granular level, in a big call center company, if it's an outsourcer, it could be onshore or offshore.
Sure.
An outsourcer, you're going to see probably on the order of 8 to 12% attrition per month.
Wow.
8%. Yeah, it's horrible. And then inside of a company, an internal contact center might be anywhere from 2 to 6, 7, 8%. So enormous turnover. Mm-hmm. The cost per attrit is high. It depends on the industry. It depends on how long the training is, how long it takes people to become productive. There's sort of a leveling off of productivity. But say in an average, say, telecom company,
sure,
probably around $6,000 to $7,000 per person.
Yeah.
Per fully baked person. So, it's essentially a math problem from there, right?
So if you've got 1,000 agents and you've got X kind of churn rate, and then at Y sort of training costs, then you do the maths, and then it adds up to a big number.
Right. So a 500-person center might turn over 500 to 600 people a year at $6,000. I mean, yeah, it adds up in a big hurry. Worldwide, we see the problem at running right around $5 billion. If you're talking about sort of large call centers, it's more if you start to try to get it, into every customer service department, but sort of the accessible market. Okay. So yeah, an enormous problem. And if you look at contact center management surveys, typically this will show up in the top 3 and often will be listed as the number 1 problem, is employee attrition.
And do executives make that sort of link between that cost and that sort of big area of focus? And does it have obviously it's going to have a negative impact on their ability to deliver sort of continually kind of good service and improving service, right?
Yeah, so there's kind of this interesting dynamic with the contact centers. So because of outsourcing, there's been this trend toward commoditization. So if you're a BPO, if you're an outsourcer, you're generally competing on cost as long as your quality meets a certain threshold.
Yeah.
And so better cost control really equals more market share. And if it's an internal center, cost control matters too. It's not quite as tight, but there's always the threat that some senior managerial person, is going to say, we need to outsource these call centers and lay everybody off from our own.
Right.
So... Or contact center is actually the more appropriate word, because there's other kinds of contact, right? It's not all call-based or voice. A lot of it's text-based. So because of that, the impact of it's not just like, we can kind of increase our bottom line, but our bottom line is really the sort of key to our survival or growth. It has a sort of double impact.
You're right. Okay. Now, I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you guys are, again, you talked about some of the stuff that's coming out of the research out of MIT and things, but you're creating this application which is, it's trying to use sort of gamification and high-touch management and use of data analytics and all that sort of stuff as a way of improving retention. I mean, can you explain to me kind of where it's kind of come from and what it is exactly that you guys are doing?
Sure. So maybe let me put it in context. You're used to the word gamification makes me want to put it in context. So
okay.
it might fit under that banner in the sense that there are some kind of game elements. But there's this trend in contact centers toward gamification because there's this idea that, make it fun and people will stay or they'll be more productive.
Yeah.
And we're actually quite skeptical of that. And part of this is that senior management has figured out how to squeeze about as much productivity as you can out of these people through carrots and sticks. And while gamification can kind of add a more interesting narrative, it still sort of functions in the carrots and sticks realm.
Right.
And in a lot of ways, call centers are already de facto gamified, right? So you've got everybody sees how they're doing on their 10 to 20 KPIs, weighted KPIs, key performance indicators. They can see how everybody else is doing, what percentile they're at, what everybody else is at. They're bonused based on this, fired based on this, promoted based on it.
Right.
So I am skeptical, and we are skeptical, that slapping some badges and leveling up and a leaderboard onto this is going to make much of a difference. And it's interesting to me because the only case studies I've seen with where gamification seems to help seem to be, it's not clear always, but seem to be in centers where the basic workforce optimization stuff is not in place. So we're hesitant about the term,
right?
And there's so many people experimenting with it, and so few, at least public, good case studies that I think there's reason to be skeptical, right?
Okay.
Gamification per se. Now, we do fit in the sense that we do have some game elements because we're trying to be a fun thing.
Yeah.
But what we're doing is really much more based on the notion that you can actually re-engineer social dynamics in the workplace. And good managers do this already, but because of the economics of contact centers, there's really not a lot of space for good management.
Yes.
And so we're essentially doing what they do, but we're finding ways to automate it through our software.
Okay. And is that related to this idea that I saw you talk about, which is, and this linked to the research around what you call social physics?
Yes, that's exactly right. So the lab at MIT that we spun out of the Media Lab has a group in it called the Human Dynamics Group. One of the founding professors of MIT's Media Lab, which is quite a famous entity, his name is Alex Pentland is what his publishing name is. And he's written a book called Social Physics that summarizes a lot of this, but really stands at the forefront of this emerging area of research at the intersection of big data, which of course everybody's familiar with, but also social network analysis or social network theory, trying to understand how humans behave in networks, how behaviors spread through the social milieu, those sorts of things. And by uniting the two, instead of taking sort of this theoretical construct, you can actually make incredibly accurate predictions about social behavior. So the reason they call it physics, they're trying to find certain, I'm going to put air quotes around it, laws of social behavior.
Right.
And of course, they express these probabilistically, and they're only across large groups, so that you might know that, a certain group, in this group, somebody's 70% likely to do X, Y, or Z. The import of this, of course, is that what they've also figured out is not only can we predict behavior, because we're looking at these creepy data sets, about who does what and goes where. This isn't just Facebook sort of stuff. But you can also nudge that behavior and use the social context to nudge behavior. So this is what actually started to really get our attention and interest us. So some of the lab's work has been inside organizations.
Right.
And what they figured out is that you can look at certain kinds of social data or certain kinds of data and identify essentially what is going on at the social level in these companies. And you can look at, say, at the team level, and using this data, you can identify which teams will be the most productive, and it's more predictive than the IQ or background or talent of the people on the teams.
Right. Okay.
Which is a big deal, and what I think really caught our attention is they figured out, they went, okay, so here's a poorly performing social network, here's a highly performing social network. So we look at, say, the nature of the problem in the network, and let's offer a little nudge to the poorly performing network and see what happens. And lo and behold, they get it to start to function more like a high performing network, and those teams' productivity, retention, absenteeism, everything gets better substantially. So we thought, wow, that might be the key to automating essentially this kind of layer of middle management, and we started looking at industries then where it was missing.
And so, how does it work in practice? I mean, is it
in
that
real life.
you do
Yeah.
the kind of the analytics and then you do the nudges, or do you start with the nudges based on the empirical data that you've already got?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a mix because we need to get people engaged with our application as part of how we get the data. So we do get some data from the contact center, some formal organizational data, some KPI data, and then we're layering that in with our observation of social behavior. And so we do need to just get people engaged initially.
Yeah.
So what happens is we run a series of challenges. People get on our virtual water cooler. We have a whole stress management part of the product where people are pairing off with buddies. And as people are doing these things, they are essentially revealing a bunch of their social preferences to us.
Yeah.
And we can kind of put these things together and start to figure out what the problems in the network look like. And then the way we deal with that is there's three kinds of interventions we're doing here.
Uh-huh.
Two are the kind of social engineering I'm talking about, just straightforward. We'll run a challenge. We do one we call the drink selfie. It's pretty illustrative. So we've seen this where we see in social network in our analysis that new employees are not socially integrated into teams quickly enough. And new employees always have high attrition rates, but they can be worsened by this fact because it's a very steep learning curve, very hard job, and if you're not socially supported, best practice disseminates more slowly, and it's a very discouraging process.
Yeah.
So when we see this in the data, we've run challenges like the drink selfie challenge, which says something like, hey, take someone on your team who's been there for 2 months or less out to coffee, on your own time, and take a funny selfie of the two of you and post it to the water cooler, and whoever gets the most upvotes wins $150,
right.
Which is a big deal if you make call center wages.
Yeah.
And it becomes this point of this sort of touchstone for these people, right? They do something nice for this person. They're doing something vulnerable by taking this silly picture. It's competitive. There's a winner. Blah blah blah. What ends up happening is you actually start to see the network morphing a little bit, and the attrition rate, appears to be going down. Our data sets are a little small on this particular one, but we're seeing what looks very encouraging in the data. So another kind of intervention we do is analytic-based. So this is analytics, and then we actually do the intervening. There's a kind of analytics that we're working on. We have some in place already, but that we're also working on for the employer. Yeah. And the idea here is that the employers are not able to... we have this thesis that the employers can't scale great managerial practice, right? We're doing it for them. So what we don't do is give them analytics that say, here is the kind of social unhealth in your network that you have. Here's the way you need to change all sorts of managerial practice and reorganize your company. We don't take a consultative route. We try to make it very concrete. Right. So, for example, we've been experimenting with a big BPO recently on whose break should be at the same time, where we are actually looking at the social network and saying who are the people who need to be able to spend time with one another. And our lab actually did a rudimentary version of this in a call center, totally ironically, like this is not why we set out for call centers, and saw it work quite well, but we're taking it to a sort of higher level.
Right.
So things like that, identifying supervisors that need some intervention, because supervisors are big drivers of attrition. Sometimes employees are driving attrition around them. So looking at social data and essentially helping the managerial people tease out where the highest leverage concrete actions are for themselves. So those two of the things. And then the third one is we use this kind of social capital we're building to change some behaviors in a way that really improves the employees' lives. So stress is a big problem in contact center work.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Managing stress, there's all kinds of evidence-based ways to manage stress, right? Mindfulness, biofeedback, guided breathing, exercise, all this sort of stuff. And so we're doing some things to encourage people to do that. Now, what's different here is that there's plenty of wellness programs out there that are doing that. Everybody knows what they should do, but people don't do it, right?
Right.
And part of the research that really caught our attention early on in the lab focuses on behavior change through the use of various kinds of social incentives. And so we actually utilize a variety of them. It depends on the kind of thing you're asking people to do and if it's episodic, if it's a one-off, that kind of thing. But we use these incentives, and lo and behold, it actually changes behavior. So we started with randomized control trials that showed us it would change behavior, and then we've built this into the product. So I should give an example. So we have one that we do for, say, ongoing people doing their breathing exercises. And every day you've got this sort of goal. How many of these exercises have you done? You do them in the app. So there's this verification process.
Yeah.
And if you reach your goal, rather than rewarding you, we reward you actually picked a couple buddies who sort of serve as accountability partners at work, and we reward them. We don't reward you.
Right.
And it turns out that's 7 times roughly, if you're good friends, it's 7 times as effective as if we reward you directly. So we're doing a lot of sort of mind hacks here in a way, but it's all really driven by the building up of social capital or the use of it to change behavior. And so we're seeing, you're talking about a demographic that is not super into self-help literature, and we're seeing something like 60-70% of the call center participating actively doing these sorts of things.
Okay, that's cool. So, because it sounds like you're in this sort of development cycle, kind of right now. And you're sort of it's being built out of the data, and you're running kind of trials and so on and so forth. But do you actually have some actual real use data that you could share with us, even if it's anonymous?
Yes, I do have to anonymize it, but yes, I can.
Just because it's like going, well, that sounds quite cool, but let's kind of see what it does in reality, if you know what I mean.
Right. Well, and these contact center senior managers are famously quite tight with their money, right? And they should be, because they're operating on tiny margins. So in the end, what they really want to know is, am I really going to save money? Mm-hmm. And we do now have 2 case studies we've done. So we've done 2 pilots, paid pilots with big companies.
Right.
One is a large North American telecom company, mm-hmm. and one is a very large global BPO.
Okay.
And the telco was the one we did first, had a spectacular set of results. We reduced attrition by over 2/3 in the intervention group, by about half in the center. We had a significant impact on Net Promoter Score, 3.5% to goal. You kind of have to know their parlance to know exactly what that means, but basically enough that it made such a big difference that they've started recommending us to their outsourcers for their outsourced work.
Okay.
And we're in their procurement process now. All told, it looks like close to about a 750% return on investment, so 7.5x ROI after 6 months.
Wow, that's cool.
Very spectacular. And then our next at this BPO was a larger center. It was also a North American based center. We're looking at some of their Filipino centers next, mm-hmm. but similar results. I think center-wide, about a 55% reduction in attrition, but coming down from a higher number because the BPOs, as I mentioned, have higher attrition rates. They measured our effect on absenteeism, whereas the telecom didn't, and roughly a 10 to 15% reduction in unplanned absenteeism each month, and we're seeing some increase on sort of the productivity side, throughput, about a 1.5%. So in the end, all in, they're looking at about a 700% ROI. So very similar after 6 months as well.
Wow, there's some pretty cool results there, Ron. You must be getting really excited about starting to shout about, or being able to shout about some of those results, even if it's anonymously.
Yeah, it's amazing. I remember the first time we were really crunching the big numbers at the telecom company. And we sat down with this outside data scientist. We were double checking our methodology, and I made them run it, 10 times. I was running the numbers myself. I just couldn't believe how good it was. Like, I expected us to make an impact, but it felt too good to be true. And it's continued to work well, and we're working with outsiders to make sure there's no systematic bias in our methodology or whatever. We're using actually quite rigorous methodology, much more than your sort of normal business decision-making process, almost at academic level.
Okay.
In part because we early on needed to know, does this really work? Because, we're founders. We want to know that what we're going to do is going to be successful. And while that doesn't guarantee success, it seems like it really improves our chances. And so we wanted to ask ourselves this question very honestly. And the answer came back resoundingly. This has a huge impact on these people's lives and on the bottom line.
Okay. And so, what's next for you guys apart from world domination, obviously, with ROI figures like that? I mean, can companies kind of go sign up for their own kind of trials, their own kind of pilots?
Yes. So we just finished raising a financing round, closed last week. So that's been a big thing. So we've been moving into. Thank you so much. So we've been moving into a planning phase. It looks like I'll be doing some hiring, particularly on the sales side, and expanding our tech team more. Initially we really were going after people who were willing to be case studies, and maybe that's going to still be true in a couple of areas. Like we need a Filipino case study, we need an Indian case study, we probably need a Central American, for just strongly different enough cultures. Although the evidence seems to suggest they'll go quite well. Beyond that, though, now we're really moving into a different part of the market. We have this clear proof. We had strong scientific evidence going in, so now it's a matter of just getting out there and finding some of those, maybe not the innovators, but the early adopters, maybe even some of the early majority. So to that end, that's why I'm hiring in sales, where we are shouting from the rooftops, I think is a great way to put it. I think we're most likely to run into the ROI numbers are so good that initially people go, what? What's the trick? But so I try to encourage people to bring their data scientist people in to critique us, and that seems to help with buy-in. We are trying to work on helping our future customers really understand how this is embedded in the workday. What are the hidden costs, those kinds of things, to make sure that they really have a grip on it. Because what we're finding is most of them are pretty excited about the impact. They're trying to figure out how much managerial bandwidth they have to bring it in.
Sure.
So we're kind of moving toward re-engineering our sales process from, hey, we have this great opportunity for you to be this great case study, to, hey, we've got this product that works, and here's what it really looks like on a day-to-day basis for you.
Yeah, and it's going to make your life easier, and you're kind of you hit your numbers kind of more, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, the challenge being that it's sort of an evangelical category. I mean, you could slot us under workforce optimization potentially, but outside of that, people are talking about gamification. They're certainly talking about retention, but most of the work on retention is trying the latest and greatest management initiative that your consultant told you about.
Yeah.
So, which is actually what I think our real competition is sort of this belief, this very optimistic belief by managers that they're gonna, they're just one new thing they're going to try away from solving this problem.
Yep.
I've all been working on this for 20 or 30 years and not getting anywhere, so I want them to be just a little bit discouraged because I want to solve it for them. But so I think because that's a category that sort of isn't currently on budget, we're kind of trying to figure out exactly the best way to sell it. But we're getting a lot of attention from a lot of big players. I'll be visiting, I'll say, one of the two largest, a president of one of the major regions of one of the two largest BPOs in the world next week. So, I mean, people are paying attention.
Cool. And does it kind of link the benefits, some of the benefits that you're seeing for the client organizations? Is it linking through to improvements in sort of culture and employee engagement sort of dynamics as well?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're going to start measuring more is specifically engagement. So, the clients themselves have said, we really want to see the outcomes rather than just engagement, which is sort of an intermediate outcome. But because that's become such a topic of the day, we're going to start measuring it more. But we do have, between the outcomes and the sort of anecdotal data we have from employee testimonials, I've never felt like I was on a real team before. I feel like I've gotten to know my coworkers more, friends, blah, blah, blah. We're quite certain that the outcomes there will be very good. But yeah, we haven't spent a lot of time measuring it because we've been going after the sort of harder numbers. In part, to be honest, it's easy to look at something like this and shunt us into an HR department, and that's kind of not a great way to sell what we're doing.
No, sure.
So we've avoided the terminology. We try not to use the word employee when we talk about what we're doing. Like at the headline, truth be told, we are completely managing employee morale, but we're doing it in a way that really makes a difference to the operators. And so we're still working on what is our sort of one phrase, title of what we're doing.
Yeah, what's the strap line?
Yeah.
And so, Ron, that's fascinating. I mean, and I love the idea that it's taking kind of what it's taking and comparing almost high-performing teams and the actual empirical data behind the social dynamics that exist within those high-performing teams, and then learning from that and applying it in almost these nudges. It's almost like a behavioral science type of approach to nudging better performance.
It is. In fact, you could say it's an extension of the sort of behavioral economic paradigm, with the exception, or you would almost say, behavioral economics is so much the taking psychological insight and putting it into the realm of sort of our understanding of Homo economicus as sort of a poor understanding of the human. I would just say it's like the sociological component that we're bringing in too, right? So similar nudges, but we're doing so at the network level rather than just at the individual level.
Fantastic. So, Ron, is there anything else that you think that that we've missed that you'd like to talk about before I ask you my final question?
Well, I don't think we've missed a lot. I think maybe it might be worth noting that I would love to circle back to something, which is the point I made about cost savings and revenue growth, right? That this is an industry where cost savings is not only important because managing costs is important, but because it's a driver of who gets what clients. In fact, also the competition is so fierce, particularly with the outsourcers, that they're always looking for an edge up, something to talk about to their clients, some innovative thing they're doing.
Sure.
And this is, I see this as a real opportunity, and it's funny because a lot of times we get brought into companies now by, heads of business development or people like that who basically say, like, I would love to be able to tell, such and such telecom whose business we're fighting for, or such and such car company or whatever, that we're doing this. We're using this cool spin-off. It's improving, employee engagement, outcomes, quality of life, because people care about this sort of thing. Anyway, I think there's a real opportunity on the revenue side here too. And I think when people look at this, their tendency is to just think about the cost side because it's so good on the cost side. But I think it's easy to lose in the message. So I think that's probably the one thing I'd like to highlight again.
Fantastic. So, I think it's a great story, Ron, and I can see. I think it's exciting, kind of what you're doing, because it almost feels like that contact centers and whether they're in-house or outsourced, it's almost been like for the last number of years, it's almost been a bit like, how can I squeeze more juice out of this existing dry piece of fruit?
Yes,
and
it's a great analogy.
It's almost in many ways what you're doing is you're almost like
reinfusing,
rehydrating the fruit in many ways.
That's a great analogy. I often think of so much of the productivity work done in call centers as either carrots and sticks, or pushing from behind or pulling from in front of, right? Mm-hmm. And this is really about building up the instrument that's between those carrots and sticks, right? Building up the human being, actually increasing their capability by managing their psychological state, managing how supported they are. And again, this sort of thing isn't just, they feel better so they produce better, although that's true and it makes a huge difference.
Sure.
But it's also that an optimal social network, disseminates best practice faster and people get trained quicker, and there's certain things like that are embedded in this. But I agree. Yeah, I would say it's like putting the juice back in the fruit.
Nice. So, Ron, my final question is this. I always ask: is there anything that you would like to shamelessly plug?
Well, yes. So we are hiring, as I mentioned, and one of the things that we're hiring right now is salespeople. And as I said to you earlier, we really are in the process of sort of re-engineering our sales process, moving from this please let us do a pilot and prove something to we have this great new innovation that works, and we want to show you how it embeds in your workflow. We want to give you sort of the sophisticated analysis of how it can save you money, and it's evangelical, right? There's really no category for this yet.
Right.
So I'm actually looking for a very specific kind of salesperson. It could be somebody with a lot of sales experience or not. What I'm really looking for is somebody that wants to be in sales, doing enterprise work that's also quite sophisticated, right? And having come from sales, I know that most people who are really good at grinding out deals and knocking on doors and eating steak with executives and things like that aren't always the ones who are really going to want to do this sort of complex, consultative sale.
Right.
There are certainly those types. So we're looking for, kind of MBA types who want to be doing cutting edge enterprise sales, who are hungry, who have thick skin, all the right stuff for sales, but who also happen to be just very sharp. And we're going to be hiring a couple of those positions in the next couple months. And so I would love to let your audience know that fact, because we want the best of the best selling this.
Fantastic. Well, Ron, I'll make sure I get that all kind of linked up and to both MIT and yourselves and written up. Just so that we can help you, as I say, shout from the rooftops a little bit about some of the great work that you're doing in terms of bringing this research and these insights into the world, and that it can have an impact both at an organizational level, but also at a very kind of individual and very human level. So,
yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. That's been great.
Thank you. It's really fun to have an opportunity to do well by doing good, right? I mean, that's what everybody wants to be able to do, and it was really neat to spot that, and so thanks for letting us get our message out. I really appreciate taking the time to talk today.
All right. Thank you.
Take care, Adrian.